Battle of Iraq, 61 AH. Husayn ibn Ali and his followers remained in that fortified village of Battle of Iraq for about 3 days. During that period, he carried on negotiations with the commander of the Umayyad advance force, that is, Umar ibn Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas. Husayn had brought his group to this fortified village, because it was close to the Euphrates River. Unfortunately, Umar ibn Sa'ad had arrived the next day with 4,500 soldiers, and he blocked all access to the river. As we mentioned in the previous episode, during Husayn ibn Ali's journey from Mecca to Kufa, people were joining them. Eventually, they started running low on resources, particularly food and water, to the point where they even had to kill one of their camels, which is a risky move when you need camels to survive in the desert. But they also needed water. And so part of the reason for them switching to this fortified village was its proximity to the Euphrates River. But now you have Umar ibn Sa'ad and the 4,500 soldiers. So Husayn didn't have much room to negotiate. His situation has just gotten very bad. He is traveling with only a few men, women and children. He has this... At this point in time, Husayn's hopes of entering Kufa and trying to reestablish the caliphate from his father, those things are over. He knows that's not happening now. After so many messengers of his had been killed, after seeing the advance force of 1,000, and now he sees the full army of 4,500, Husayn ibn Ali knows that there's no way he can be victorious now. Banu Umayyah, they have complete control of the city, and the Kufans, the Shiites within Kufa, they have been completely mentally and spiritually defeated. The most that Husayn could really hope for at this point in time was a dignified and peaceful surrender. Umar ibn Sa'ad, as we mentioned, he didn't really want to fight Husayn ibn Ali, and he would have been more than happy to make that happen if it hadn't been for the orders that he received from Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, he is the governor of Iraq. He is the viceroy of Iraq, really. He is the ruler under the command of the caliph, which right now is Yazid ibn Muawiyah. He is the ruler of Iraq, that is specifically Kufa and Basra, the two garrison cities. And he is also, for lack of a better phrase, Umar ibn Sa'ad's boss, his superior. And Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad had demanded unconditional surrender. Umar ibn Sa'ad, his soldiers blocked access to the Euphrates River, and so now Husayn's followers are suffering. They don't have access to water. Without access to water, Husayn's followers, which included children, infants, and women, they were starting to suffer. Husayn's son, his middle son, Ali the Middle, that was his nickname. Well, really his nickname was Zainul Abidin, but he was known as Ali the Middle. He had developed a fever, and so without water, they didn't have a way to try to cool him down and bring the fever down. So this young man, who's only about 14 years old right now, he's suffering from the internal heat of the fever, as well as the external heat of being in the desert. So one night, while they were doing this 3-day negotiating thing with Umar ibn Sa'ad, Husayn sent 20 of his men to go and sneak past the Umayyad soldiers and get some water from the river. And the mission was successful, and the men did return with some water after sneaking past the Umayyads, but this was only some temporary relief. They couldn't bring back enough to allow Husayn to wait out the Umayyads indefinitely. So Husayn sends a message to Umar ibn Sa'ad with 3 options. Here's what Husayn said. First, you and I go to Damascus, and I'll give Yazid the bay'ah. Or you let me go back to the Hijaz. Or you may send me to the frontiers, where I'll spend my last days fighting the Romans. So for Umar ibn Sa'ad, this sounds like a good deal. This will effectively end the rebellion. Husayn ibn Ali is offering to go and give the bay'ah, give the pledge of allegiance to Yazid ibn Muawiyah, who he doesn't really care for, but he's willing to do this to end this fighting, get him completely out of their hair. He's willing to even go to the front lines and just spend the rest of his life fighting in jihad against the Byzantine Empire. So Umar ibn Sa'ad, he sends this message, this proposal from Husayn ibn Ali on to Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. When Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad receives the proposal, he asks one of his advisors for advice. Now this advisor was named Shamir ibn Dhul Jawshan from the Banu Kalb, and Banu Kalb was one of the oldest and most noble clans in Arabia. Banu Kalb is mentioned in various ahadith. They play a huge role throughout the early part of Islamic history. Many members of Banu Kalb had settled in Syria after the Muslim conquest of Syria, and they were, generally speaking, staunch supporters of Banu Umayyah. If you continue to follow this story with me, inshallah, Banu Kalb will come up very often. So this man from Banu Kalb, Shamir ibn Dhul Jawshan, he advises Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad not to accept Husayn's offer. Here's what he said. According to Tarikh al-Tabari, Husayn came and camped on your land to overthrow you. By Allah's mercy, he has failed in that objective. But you will look weak if you let him leave without submitting to you. Ubaydullah hears this and he agrees. You can see that a lot of decisions that these guys make is based on their perception of what is weak and strong. If you go back to the story of Hujr ibn Adi, one of the reasons that Muawiyah didn't just let them go, even though he almost was certain that Ziyad ibn Abi had forged that letter or had faked those signatures that was condemning Hujr ibn Adi and accusing him of so many things. Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan knew that wasn't necessarily true, but he didn't want to look weak, and so he was caught in a quandary, which ultimately led him to having Hujr ibn Adi executed. Well, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, he's going along the same route, and he agrees, and so he writes back to Umar ibn Sa'ad, rejecting all three of those options. And he tells Umar ibn Sa'ad that Husayn's only option was to surrender and give bay'ah to Yazid ibn Muawiyah, but to do so in Kufa through Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. Husayn's final offer. When Husayn ibn Ali learned that Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad had rejected all of his proposals, he basically had no choice but to prepare for battle. Husayn just really couldn't bring himself. He couldn't bring himself to surrender to Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. There are many reasons why Husayn found it demeaning to submit to Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. Ubaydullah's father, whom was mostly known as Ziyad ibn Abihi, the son of his father, he had orchestrated Hujr ibn Adi's executions. He mentioned he had forged or faked all those signatures that accused Hujr ibn Adi of rebellion and sedition and all sorts of things. And that led to Hujr ibn Adi being executed. Furthermore, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad had executed several people from amongst Husayn ibn Ali's followers and his own family. He had executed Muslim ibn Aqil, who was his cousin, Hani ibn Urwa, who was not related to Husayn ibn Ali, but he was one of the Shia to Ali of Kufa, and several others. Not to mention the fact that Ubaydullah would almost certainly use this as an opportunity to humiliate Husayn ibn Ali and his family. For instance, Ubaydullah might insist that Husayn publicly curse his own father. You never know. He had already tried to make these other two people curse his father and denounce Husayn and Ali. And when they refused to do so, Ubaydullah had them killed. Who knows what Ubaydullah might have done had he gotten Husayn in his clutches. He may have tried to make him curse his own father. Or he may do something that's still humiliating, though not as bad as cursing his father. He may have tried to parade Husayn ibn Ali through the streets of Kufa, through the streets of Basra as a token, saying, look, we've captured the son of Ali, things like that. Husayn then asked Umar ibn Sa'ad to give him one night to think things over, and Umar ibn Sa'ad agreed. So that night, Husayn ibn Ali met with his followers and gave them a final chance to leave and save themselves. And here's the speech that he made to them. My brothers, you are the best of people in this world. You are my followers and my Ahlul Bayt. You have proven your loyalty and piety and have fulfilled your oaths. Our enemies are approaching, and I believe my last day in this world will come tomorrow. These people want me. You have no reason to suffer on my behalf. Use this night as a cover and leave while you still can. I will hold nothing against you and free you of all obligations. Well, as we can see, the honor amongst these early Arabs was very admirable. They had some high honors. One by one, each one of these men, some of them were directly related to Husayn ibn Ali, some of them were only his mawla, some of them were just his followers, weren't related to him at all. But one by one, each man refused to abandon him. Here's some of the quotes from some of these men who refused to abandon him. This is from Abdullah ibn Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. Why would I want to stay alive while you are dead? May Allah protect me from that. This is a statement from one of the Shia from Kufa who had joined Husayn ibn Ali. How could we leave you, Ibn Rasulullah? How could we stand before Allah having abandoned his beloved servant, son of his beloved servant? Another Shia, once again, no relation to Husayn ibn Ali, he said, By Allah, I would rather be killed, brought back to life, burned to ashes, and scattered to the wind 70 times over than abandon you, Ibn Fatima. And then Zuhair ibn Uqayn, that's the guy who divorced his wife in order to join Husayn. We mentioned him in the last episode. He said, I would rather die 1,000 times if it meant protecting you and your Ahlul Bayt. Then another Shia, once again, no relation to Husayn ibn Ali, just a follower of Husayn ibn Ali and a Shia to Ali. His name was Nafi' al-Jamali. He said, By Allah, we will never leave you, Ibn Ali. We will sacrifice our lives for you. We will protect you with our necks, hands, and heads. And this comment comes from one of the older Shia named Habib al-Muzahir. He said, I am an old man, Ibn Ali, and death will come for me soon. If it comes tomorrow, let it be with me fulfilling the promise I gave you and your father. So with these words of support and confidence, Husayn ibn Ali and his Shia, his party, his followers, his partisans, they prepare for battle. One of the things they did to hopefully improve their chances was they brought their tents together and set them on fire. So now the army would have to get around that. But then they also dug a ditch along their right flank, protecting their right side, and they filled that with wood and then set that on fire also. This was basically a fire-filled ditch preventing the army from coming from the right, from their right. You'll see how that plays out in a moment. Karbala, Iraq, 61 AH. The battle began on the 10th day of Muharram, 61 AH. Muharram is the first month of the Islamic calendar. It began with Umar ibn Sa'ad. He shot an arrow in the air, and that signaled that the battle was about to begin. There are different reports of the numbers of Husayn's forces, but honestly, I doubt that he had more than 100 men altogether, maybe 150. But I think the most reliable numbers are he had about 40 horsemen and perhaps 50 infantry, which gives him less than 100, roughly about 90 men altogether. Everyone else in his party would have been women and children or people too old to fight or sick people or whatever. Meanwhile, the Umayyad troops numbered around 4,500. The Umayyad army was divided into left and right wings, and each wing was further split into two halves, that is cavalry and infantry. That fiery ditch that we mentioned just a few minutes ago that Husayn had dug the night before, that forced the Umayyads to approach from the left. So Husayn had dug this ditch on his right side, so that means that the Umayyads had to come from Husayn's left. Basically, this was to help him not get surrounded. He only had to really worry about the Umayyads coming from one direction. So now the army, that is the Umayyad army, they are now marching towards Husayn ibn Ali. They see the ditch. They see Husayn's small group of men are standing up, ready to fight. The battle is on. So the Umayyad army starts marching towards Husayn ibn Ali. As they close in on Husayn ibn Ali, he calls out to them. Once they're within earshot and they can hear him, he starts calling out to them. This is what Husayn calls out, shouts out to the Umayyad army as they close in and get closer to him. People, let me remind you why I am here. You called me, and I will leave if you do not want me here. You have no reason to harm me, nor my Ahlul Bayt. Think of what you're doing and think of who I am. Aren't I the son of Fatima, the daughter of your prophet? Aren't I the son of his cousin and the first of the believers? Isn't my uncle Hamza the leader of the martyrs? Isn't my uncle Ja'far ibn Abi Talib the one who flies with 2 wings in heaven? Haven't you heard what my grandfather said about my brother and I? These should be enough to keep you from shedding my blood. So then Zuhair ibn Uqayn, that's the guy who divorced his wife to join Husayn ibn Ali. Zuhair ibn Uqayn, he rides up right next to Husayn ibn Ali, and he also shouts at the Umayyad troops as they're getting closer. And he says, "We are still brothers so long as you do not fight us. What has this man done to make you want to kill him? Has he killed one of your men? Has he taken your property? Your man in Damascus will be satisfied without you killing him." Well, of course, the soldiers, they just keep marching. It is up to Umar ibn Sa'ad, their commander, to tell them to stop. Until he tells them to stop, they're just going to keep on marching. Finally now, the army does stop at Umar's command. They stop a few hundred yards from Husayn's front line, and now the Umayyad army forms into battle formation. So there's a brief pause as both sides are close to each other, but they haven't started fighting yet, but they're facing off now. During this pause, Hur ibn Yazid, that was the Umayyad captain of the advanced guard, we discussed him in the previous episode. He defected from the Umayyads and crossed over to join Husayn ibn Ali's side. Just one man, not the entire advanced guard, just Hur ibn Yazid, one man. He crossed over to join with Husayn ibn Ali. Hur ibn Yazid was crying as he went to Husayn ibn Ali and begged him for forgiveness. Here's what he said. "May Allah forgive me, Ibn Rasulullah. This is my fault. I stopped you from going back to Mecca when you had the chance. I never thought these people would resort to killing you. I offer my life for you, Ibn Rasulullah. Will you forgive me?" Well, of course, Husayn ibn Ali forgave Hur ibn Yazid, and he comforted him. And then the duels began. The Battle of Karbala. As per tradition, there were several rounds of single combat before the actual battle began. If you followed any of my previous descriptions of battle between Muslims and other Muslims and Muslims and non-Muslims, there was a series of one-to-one battles between like the champions of each side. Several of Husayn's followers engaged in one-on-one duels with members from the Umayyad force, and Husayn ibn Ali's men won each and every single one of these single combats. Finally, however, the commander of the Umayyad right wing, he stopped all that. He said, let's stop all this up. His name was Amr ibn Hajjaj. Amr ibn Hajjaj called out, "We have thousands of soldiers. We could throw rocks at them and we'd still destroy them." So Amr ibn Hajjaj, he got tired of seeing his men get killed and maimed by Husayn's men. He's like, let's forget this stuff. We can throw rocks at these guys and we will still kill them. There's 4,000 of us, almost 5,000 of us. We can just throw rocks at them and that will be enough. So he's ready to just get this over with. And Amr ibn Hajjaj, he is the one who launched the first assault against Husayn. So he launched an assault against Husayn's left flank, while Shamir ibn Dhul Jalshan, that was the one who had given Ubaydullah the advice to reject Husayn's offers. Shamir ibn Dhul Jalshan, he attacked from the right. Now the fiery ditch protected Husayn's right, so Husayn was able to forget about Shamir ibn Dhul Jalshan and just focus on Amr ibn Hajjaj coming on the left. Husayn ibn Ali only had about 20 soldiers on his left. He had about 90 total, but only 20 soldiers on his left. While this first wave of Umayyads, there were probably hundreds of them. So Nafi' al-Jamali, he was one of those who had promised to stick with Husayn ibn Ali. When Husayn ibn Ali gave him the chance to leave at night, he promised to stick with Husayn ibn Ali. He was a great archer. He just started shooting arrows at the Umayyads. So as the Umayyads are coming, he's just taking his arrows and plucking them off one by one as fast as he can. And each time he shot an arrow, he would say, "Inni al-Jamali, amantu bidini Ali." This means I am al-Jamali. That was his, most likely his clan, Jamal. I am al-Jamali. I believe in the religion of Ali. So the fiery ditch that Husayn and his men had dug the night before, this forced the Umayyads into a bottleneck. And this did make it easier for Husayn and his men to fight them off, and also for Nafi' al-Jamali to hit them with these arrows. But then a group of Umayyad cavalry, they broke off and headed towards the tents. They ran around the ditch and headed towards the tents where the women and children were. Zuhair ibn Uqayn, that was the guy who divorced his wife to join Husayn, he led several other Sharia to rush over and fight those Umayyads off. Now, with the smaller numbers, Husayn's men did have a bit of an advantage. Husayn's cavalry was small, but they were fast, and they were also ready to risk everything, so they were very daring. With their speed and mobility, they used this to their advantage, and they were frustrating the Umayyads by hitting them with a lot of brazen and unorthodox attacks because they weren't following a full structured army like the Umayyads were. But eventually, the Umayyad numbers were more dominant. One of the Umayyad commanders, he just ordered his archers to just shoot or just target the horses of the cavalry, of Husayn's cavalry. Just shoot the horses and take them out, and that pretty much devastated Husayn's cavalry. So the Umayyads had hundreds of archers, obviously. They have 4,500 men. They would have had hundreds of archers. They just showered them with arrows, wiped out Husayn's cavalry, at least the horses. Many of the men survived, but the horses were decimated. So 1 minute, Husayn's Sharia were darting everywhere, attacking and fighting and running, doing whatever they needed to do. And the next, you have dozens, because they only had but so many. You have dozens of dead horses everywhere. So with Husayn's cavalry now destroyed, any fantasy he may have had of victory, that was gone. There's just now 90 or so, roughly 90 or so Sharia infantrymen. Now everybody was infantry. They're all on foot now. 90 or so Sharia infantry against 4,500 Umayyad soldiers. Nonetheless, despite these overwhelming odds, Husayn's men still arranged themselves for battle, and they continued to fight. So the way it was set up from Husayn's side, that is, the first line of defense would have been the Sharia, the Shiites who were not from the Hashim. They were the non-Hashim Sharia. In other words, those people who followed Husayn ibn Ali, who supported him, but they were not his family members. And then after the Sharia, who were not from Banu Hashim, it would have been the men from Banu Hashim, and that would include the Mawali as well. The Mawla were kind of considered family, even if they weren't necessarily from Banu Hashim. They would have been considered an affiliate of Banu Hashim at the least. So that would be the next line of defense would have been the men from Banu Hashim, and finally, the last one standing would have been, of course, Husayn. Everyone, these two lines, the non-Hashim Sharia, and then the Hashim men, and then finally Husayn. Everyone's trying to protect Husayn ibn Ali. The old man, that was the one named Habib al-Mazahir. He's one who said, if I'm going to die, let me die protecting you, Ibn Rasulullah. Habib al-Mazahir and 7 other Sharia, they get their swords, their spears, and they rush towards the Umayyads. And they fought bravely, of course, at least according to the stories. I'm sure they did. They fought bravely. They were trying to clear a path through the Umayyad ranks and try to get to the commander, that guy named Ahmad ibn Hajjaj, who said we could just throw rocks at them. They're trying to clear a path to get to him and maybe kill him. And if they could kill him, maybe that might cause a ripple effect. Maybe that might cause some confusion. Maybe that might, who knows? That was their hope. But there's only 7 of them, 8 of them. They were quickly overwhelmed and cut down. Elsewhere on the battlefield, Hur ibn Yazid, that's the former Umayyad commander who had defected over to Husayn ibn Ali, Hur ibn Yazid and Zuhair ibn Uqayn, the guy who divorced his wife, they were also doing their best against the Umayyads, but eventually they were also surrounded, overwhelmed, overpowered, and killed. Husayn ibn Ali took a quick break from the fighting to lead his men in what is known as the fear prayer. This is a special battlefield salat, a special battlefield prayer where 2 rows take turns standing and prostrating during the salat. The standing row was to remain vigilant and protect the others while they were prostrating, and then the others would stand up. Then the standing row would go and prostrate, and the first group would protect them, and they'll go back and forth like that. By the time Husayn ibn Ali had finished the fear prayer, the Umayyads had managed to breach that fiery ditch that he had built, or that he had dug. Husayn and his men had dug the night before to protect his right flank. After the prayer, Husayn ibn Ali was informed that Zuhair ibn Qayn, Habib ibn Muzahir, and Hud ibn Yazid had been killed in the fighting, and the Umayyads were really closing in now. The Umayyads had torn through the remaining Shiites, that front line of non-Hashim Shiites. The Umayyads had torn through them, killed them, maimed them, destroyed them, and now they're pushing towards Husayn. And so Husayn's defense is crumbling. So Husayn's defensive lines are crumbling. The non-Hashim Shia have been wiped out, and now it's the men of Banu Hashim. These are now Husayn's relatives. They hurried up and created another line of defense to protect Husayn ibn Ali. Nafi al-Jamali, that's the guy who was shooting the arrows, he's still there, and he's still shooting arrows trying to hold back the Umayyads. And as he's shooting the arrows, he's still repeating that same line of poetry, Inni al-Jamali, amantu bidini Ali. I am al-Jamali, I believe in the religion of Ali. But eventually, he ran out of arrows. This is not a TV show, this is not movies. Eventually, he's going to run out of arrows. When he ran out of arrows, Nafi al-Jamali, he took out his sword and he went and attacked the Umayyads. And as he was fighting and attacking the Umayyads, he kept repeating that poetry, that line of poetry, Inni al-Jamali, amantu bidini Ali. But just like the other Shia, Nafi al-Jamali, he couldn't fight against thousands of men. He was finally injured. They brought him to that man from Banu Kalb, Shamir ibn Dhul Jawshan. Shamir, he took the tip of his sword and placed it on Nafi's back and pushed it through until it came through the front of his chest. The last non-Hashim defender, the last defender who was not from Banu Hashim, was a man named Abis al-Shakiri. He was perhaps the third greatest swordsman of Arabia up to that time. And Abis, he took out his sword and he was fighting, and he was one of the greatest swordsmen Arabia had ever known, but even he can't fight against 4,000 men by himself. Someone shot him in the leg with an arrow, and he went down, and then he was cut to pieces. The final massacre. So with the front line gone, it was now just the men of Banu Hashim, the last line of defense before they could get to Husayn. And that line, of course, included many of Ali's descendants, Ali ibn Abi Talib's descendants. Some of them were young boys, no older than 13 years old, but it was only 16 of them. 16 men facing off against thousands of Umayyad soldiers. Husayn's oldest son, Ali al-Akbar, he was the first one to go down. Ali al-Akbar, I estimate him to be something like maybe an older teenager, maybe a young man in his 20s. He had never really been in battle before. He was a descendant of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so he was almost certainly coddled, lived a pretty good life, I'm sure. So he had never really been in battle. The Umayyads were initially reluctant to attack him. They knew who he was. He's the Prophet's great-grandson. They knew who he was, but eventually somebody got bold enough to attack Ali al-Akbar. And once one person attacks, the others sort of followed suit. And Ali al-Akbar was attacked and cut, and seeing him get cut and killed and stabbed and wounded and punctured, the other men of Banu Hashim kind of lost their discipline for a while, and they rushed forward and they fought to fight the Umayyads back, and they cleared a path and they dragged Ali al-Akbar's body and brought him back to the front lines, back to Husayn's tent. But it was too late by then. The boy was, of course, dead. According to Tariq al-Tabari, according to the story, Husayn got down from his horse. He picked up his son's bloody body. He carried it over to his sister Zainab's tent and left it there. And then he returned to the front line. Obviously, he's torn up inside, but he still has a battle to fight. So he goes back to the front line, and the Umayyads had now formed a semicircle around the remaining men of Banu Hashim. And then the Umayyads attacked. Husayn ibn Ali and the men of Banu Hashim, they fought bravely. We know that. They fought bravely. They fought with everything that they could. But 16 people, well now 15 I guess with Ali al-Akbar did, 15 men cannot stand against 4,000. One by one, they were cut down. Zainab's two sons, they were both around 13 years old. They also had no military experience. They were also a descendant of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam through Zainab, who would have been the Prophet's granddaughter. They were killed almost immediately. They didn't have any experience. They were just young boys. Muslim ibn Aqil's son, his name was Abdullah. He took an arrow to the chest. Muslim ibn Aqil's brothers, their names were Abdurrahman and Ja'far. They were both cut down. Husayn had two half-brothers. These were sons of Ali, but their mothers were not Fatima. Husayn's two half-brothers, their names were Abdullah ibn Ali and Ja'far ibn Ali. They were both killed. Another brother, a man named Uthman ibn Ali, he was shot with arrows and then nearly cut in half. Another brother named Muhammad ibn Ali, he was shot with arrows and then beheaded. Another half-brother named Abbas ibn Ali was shot down with arrows as well. And then Hassan ibn Ali, that is Husayn's older brother Hassan ibn Ali's sons, they were also at the battle. Their names were Abu Bakr ibn Hassan and Qasim ibn Hassan. They were both also killed. And there's also a report that Husayn's youngest son, Ali al-Asghar, who was just a baby, just an infant, he was shot and killed probably by a stray arrow. I don't think they deliberately targeted him. It wouldn't make any sense, and it's almost impossible. But with all the fighting and arrows flying around, I think it's quite likely that a stray arrow could have hit the baby, and that was it. That was it. It was now just Husayn ibn Ali. The death of Husayn ibn Ali. At this point, of course, the battle is over. Husayn's, almost his entire family is wiped out. His entire progeny, they're all wiped out. They're all dead, injured, or captured, but mostly dead. The Umayyad soldiers had kind of lost interest in the fighting by now. There are so many of them, I doubt the vast majority of them even had a chance to participate in the actual fighting. They had broken off, were now rummaging through Husayn's camp, trying to look for plunder. The women and children, those who weren't involved in the fight, there's very little that they can do against these soldiers, nothing that they can do. But there was still a crowd of Umayyad soldiers circling Husayn, wanting to attack him, or knowing that they had to attack him, but reluctant to attack him, knowing who he was. Even though they had killed his sons, killed his brothers, and they were still reluctant to attack him. That's because, of course, he's a Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's grandson. Now remember that guy that we mentioned earlier, the Sha'iyya, the name Abis al-Shakiri, who I said was the third greatest swordsman in Arabia? Well, Ali ibn Abi Talib, radiyallahu anhu, he was almost certainly the greatest swordsman in Arabia up to that point of time. And the second greatest swordsman was Husayn ibn Ali. That's another reason why the Umayyads were afraid to attack him. They knew his reputation. They knew who he was. They knew who he was the son of. But that man from Banu Kalb, Shamir ibn Dhul Jawshan, he gave the order, and now those soldiers had no choice but to attack Husayn. But Husayn made them pay. He fought and killed four of them on his own by himself before he was finally overpowered and finally brought down. There are different versions describing the sequence of events that led to Husayn's death, but this is the one that I think is perhaps the most likely. It seems to make the most sense to me. So Husayn, he took down four of the Umayyads attacking him, but in that fighting, someone cuts him on his left arm. That most likely distracted him, and once he was distracted, another soldier went and ran a spear into Husayn's ribs, and that is what ultimately killed him. And with that, the Prophet's grandson, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's grandson, was killed. That will close it out for today, inshallah. In the next episode, we will discuss some of the differences between the Sunnis and the Shia. But until then, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. You've been listening to the Islamic History Podcast, and we hope you've enjoyed the show. You can support the Islamic History Podcast and get exclusive content by subscribing to our premium channel, Islamic History Exclusive. If you're listening on YouTube, just click the join button to become a member. If you're an Apple or Spotify user, open the app and search for Islamic History Exclusive. If you're listening on Podbean, become a patron in the app and you'll get access to our premium content. You can also join by visiting patreon.com/Islamic History. I'd also like to thank Brother Zulfikar Sirosh for his research and support of the show, and thanks to all of our premium subscribers. Be sure to join the Islamic History Podcast Telegram group where you can download a copy of today's transcript. And finally, subscribe to the Islamic History Podcast on YouTube for our video documentaries. Stay tuned for a short clip from our series on Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. And until next time, my name is Muttaqi Ismail for the Islamic History Podcast. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Islamic History Exclusive. This is the podcast exclusively for Patreon subscribers of the Islamic History Podcast. And in this series, we are going over the life of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, known to the West as Saladin. In this episode, we'll be discussing the Second Crusade and the rise of Nur-ad-Din Zengi. But before we get into that, let's begin with a recap of where we are so far. In the previous episode, we discussed the Muslim resurgence which began with the rise of Imad-ud-Din Zengi. We also mentioned how Imad-ud-Din's territory was split between Aleppo in Syria and Mosul in Iraq. Imad-ud-Din Zengi desperately wanted to add Damascus to his list of conquests, but was never able to do so. However, he was able to capture Edessa in 1144, which sent shockwaves through both the Muslim and Christian worlds. And with that, let's take a look at the concept of jihad, the origins of the Second Crusade, and the rise of Nur-ad-Din Zengi. The concept of jihad. The fall of Edessa coincided with a notable rise in jihad enthusiasm in the Middle East. But before discussing this new enthusiasm further, let's briefly discuss how the concept of jihad has changed over the years. For most of human history, whether we're talking about Muslims or humanity in general, warfare was a fact of life. But in today's world, we more or less consider warfare a necessary evil to be avoided at all costs. Despite the fact we have evolved this more pacifist outlook on life, the reality is that we still glorify warfare. Our public expressions of disdain notwithstanding, we still produce and consume hundreds of documentaries, movies, television shows, and video games about war. Here in the United States, for example, we are particularly proud of our involvements in the Civil War and World War II. Most likely because these were the two wars where the United States was undeniably on the side of righteousness. This negative attitude towards warfare has entered the Muslim world as well. Nowadays, most Muslims tend to define jihad as simply a spiritual struggle and minimize or even ignore its physical aspects. While jihad definitely includes a spiritual aspect, if we are honest with ourselves, historically it has usually indicated a physical struggle in the form of armed combat for the sake of Islam. Like slavery, the ideology of jihad has evolved to match modern sensibilities. It is not my place to judge whether this evolution is positive or negative. It is simply an observation. After Jerusalem was conquered by the Crusades, there was a conspicuous lack of concern for jihad against the Franks in the Middle East. One of the primary reasons for this was that most Muslim leaders in the region at this time were more worried about holding on to what little power they had. Furthermore, many of them were entangled in some form of conflict with other local Muslim rulers. These entanglements made it nearly impossible for the Muslims to unite against the Franks. In contrast, even though the Franks squabbled and disputed and argued and sometimes even took up arms against each other, they usually put aside their differences when it came time to unite against the Muslims. However, this was something the Muslims rarely did in the first 30 years after the conquest of Jerusalem. In fact, some Muslim leaders found it more beneficial to ally themselves with the Franks. One Muslim ruler even had an agreement to share tax proceeds with one of the Frankish rulers of Outremer. Many of these Muslim leaders had been beaten into submission or preferred to pay tribute to the Franks in order to maintain the status quo. There were some Muslim leaders who united with the Franks against other Muslims. And once there was a conflict between two armies that saw Muslim and Christian warriors on both sides.